Hey everybody, it's Chris from Xano, and I'm here today to talk to you about working with option lists. An option list can be either an enum field, which is basically a text field with predefined values, or it can be separate fields inside of your database that all correlate to specific options. And those options would typically be populated on your front end through a drop-down menu or a collection of radio buttons or something to that effect. Typically, when our users work with option lists currently, you define the enum or the separate option fields in your database, but then you also need to either hard code those values into your front end or maintain a separate database table or fields in your Xano database to contain what those options are so they can be populated a little bit more dynamically on your front end. But the problem is, no matter which one of those you choose, you're still updating those option sets in two different places every time something changes. What I want to show you today is how you can leverage the Metadata API to truly dynamically populate the available options on your front end. We're going to jump into Xano and I'll go over the database architecture with you for this example. I'll give you a quick primer on the Metadata API and show you how to get started. And I'll show you how to build the APIs necessary to get the options from your database table so you can use those APIs to dynamically populate wherever those options live on your front end. So here in Xano, I'm in my workspace on the dashboard. Let's take a look at this first table called column list. This table showcases the example of having separate fields for each available option. You want to make sure that when you're creating the fields that correlate to each option, that you always tag them with a specific identifier so we can tell that those are the options that we need to look at. This enables additional fields to exist in the database table alongside those options without having to worry about maintaining two separate tables. In this example, I have a name field, which is just a text field, and then I'm using 4 Boolean fields, which is just a true or false, and I have all of them tagged with option at the beginning. So I know that those are the fields that I'm going to want to populate on my front end. The other table is called enum, and this is using an enum field. So we can see here, if I go to the settings, I have 3 predefined values for this enum field. Now let's take a look at the APIs. For this example, we're going to be leveraging the Metadata API, which if you're not familiar, is a set of API endpoints that we provide to you to programmatically work with and manage the content inside of your Xano instance. We have a ton of resources on how to use the Metadata API that we'll have linked for you along with this video. For this example, though, I'm going to give you the very basics so you can get started with this specific example. The first thing we need to do is we need to head over to our instance selection screen. We'll click the settings icon next to our instance, and we'll choose Metadata API. The first thing we'll need to do is generate an access token. An access token is required to make calls against the Metadata API. So we'll click New Access Token. We'll give it a name. We'll call this Options List Demo. And we can go ahead and define the specific permissions that we need. For this example, we just want workspace database and workspace content. So we'll click Create. We're given that access token, which we can then copy. And we just want to make sure to store this in a safe place because Xano will only show this to us once. If you don't have it available when we're building our APIs, then you will need to generate a new access token. Once we've retrieved our access token, we want to look at this instance API section. This has all of the API endpoints that we will be working with for this example. And when we click this, it opens up the documentation for the Metadata API in a new tab. You can see there are a ton of API endpoints here that we can work with. For this example, we are going to be looking at this get table schema endpoint. The first thing we want to do is click this lock button here. And this will allow us to paste our token that we just copied so we can make a call against this API. And now we can go ahead and expand this and we can take a look at some of the inputs that we need for this to work. The first thing we need is a workspace ID. To get the ID of the workspace that you're on, you just need to look at the URL of any page as you're navigating inside of Xano. You'll see for this example, our workspace ID is 701. So now we can go back to our API documentation. We'll click try it out right here, and we will type in that workspace ID. And now we need a table ID. So which table are we going to take a look at? Let's take a look at the column list table first. The column list table has an ID of 2708. So we'll take that and plug that back into our documentation. And now we can click execute and we can take a look at this response. So you can see we have our ID field, our created at field, our name field, and then finally we have all of those option fields. And so what we're going to do now is we can scroll up and we can copy this. And what that will do is this will copy it as curl. So we can import this as an API request in Xano. Let's head into one of our API groups and let's create a new API endpoint. I'm going to call this get column list values, and we'll save that. Let's add an external API request to our function stack. We'll click import curl, and we'll just paste that curl command that we got right from the documentation and click import. And we'll save this, and let's go ahead and run it just to make sure that everything works as expected. And so you can see we now have that response that we saw in our documentation in Xano, which means we can manipulate this data and get it into a format that we need. So this response returns an array of objects, and each object represents a column. So what we need to do now is we need to essentially extract the options from this list of columns. So to do that, we are going to add a new function. It's going to be under data manipulation and arrays, and we are looking for find all elements. The first thing we need to do is we need to point this to our array, and we'll do that using dot notation. Let's select the variable that our API is returning as a response, and let's take a look at the structure. So we can see we have two keys. We have request and response. Let's expand response. Under response, we have headers, result, and status. The array that we need to look at is called result. So for our dot notation, our structure will be API _1 dot response dot result. We'll save that. And now we need to enter the expression builder for this function so we can tell it what elements we're looking for. Let's expand the result one more time. We want to make sure that we know which key we want to look at to determine whether one of these fields is an option field or not. And it looks like we just need to look at the name field for this. We'll click this pencil to enter the expression builder for our array find all elements function. Our left side variable is going to be a variable called $this, which just represents a single item in that array. And we will add a dot name after, because that is the column that we're looking at. We're going to add a filter to this left side, and the filter is called contains, which returns whether or not the specified expression is found. So we're essentially searching that name key, and we're searching it for option. We'll click update, and on the right-hand side, we just want to return all elements where that is true. So we'll click save, and we'll define an output variable. I'll just call this matched, and we'll click save. And let's add that to our response so we can see the result, and we will rerun this. So you can see we have the API request here and our new matched variable, which only includes those option fields. And now this next step is going to be a little bit different, just depending on the exact format that you need for your front end. I'm going to dial it down to the simplest format possible, which will just be an array of text values. Let's create a new variable. This variable is just going to be matched.name. Now, because matched is an array of objects, what this is going to do is it's going to get every single value specified for the key of name, and it's just going to dump them inside of a text array. So we'll call this final values, and we'll save. And now let's go ahead and get rid of these two variables from our response, and we will just add that final values variable. So we'll save and we'll run this again. So you can see we now have a text array with all of those options specified. If for some reason you need to apply a sort to this array, you can do that by adding a sort filter. So let's say we want this to be in descending order instead. We'll go ahead and update and save that and rerun it. You can see now we have D, C, B, and A. The last thing I want to show you really quickly is just to show you how it works dynamically. So let's go back to the database. We'll go to the column list table and let's add another option. So we'll call this option E. Go ahead and save that. Let's go back to the API. We'll run this again. And you can see we now have option E available. You even have the ability to strip the option tag out of here completely, which might make sense just depending on how you've named your fields. So to do that, we are going to add a for each loop, which is under data manipulation. We're going to loop through our final values variable. We'll add a function to our for each loop, which is just going to be an update variable. Our existing variable is going to be item, and our value is also going to be item. Item is just the name of the variable that our loop is using to iterate through each of these values one at a time. We're going to add a filter to our value called substring. Substring will just extract a section of a text string. The start position, it's important to remember that this starts at 0. So O is 0, P is 1, and so on. So it looks like we need 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So we need to start at position 7. And our length will just be 0 because we want everything after that option underscore tag. So we'll go ahead and click update and save. And now when we run this one more time, you can see those option tags are removed and we have just the names of those options. Now that we've taken a look at how to work with separate option fields, we're going to take a look at how to do this with an enum field instead. To do that, we need to head back over to our Metadata API documentation. Let's get the table ID of our enum table, and it looks like that is 2707. So now let's head back to our Metadata API documentation. And let's type in 2707 and we'll click execute. Make sure we get the result we want so we can see we have all of the values for our enum field right there. We'll go ahead and copy this curl. Back in Xano, we're going to add a new API endpoint. We'll call this enum. We will add an external API request with our curl imported and click save. Let's make sure that gives us the result that we want. So there are our enum values right here. And the really cool thing about this is we really don't have to do any sort of manipulation or transformation to this. We can just return this array right in the response. So let's go ahead and collapse some of these and make sure we understand our structure here. So we have request, response. Under response, we have headers, result, and status. Let's expand result. And we can see that our enum field is the third object returned in the list of fields from our database. So in our response, all we really have to do is just add some dot notation to the end of this. So we're going to look for API1.response.result.to. And that might look a little weird, but if you're not familiar with arrays, arrays are numerically indexed starting at 0. So ID is 0, created at is 1, and my enum field is 2. And then we'll add a dot values. Let's save that and we will run this again. And you can see we now have an array with just our values as expected. I hope this helps show you some new ways that you can work with option lists in Xano. If you have any questions, you can let us know down in the comments below. You can also reach out to us via support chat inside Xano or on the Xano community. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.